there's a lot of different ways to approach this, but I think the way I'm going to approach this today is just to be straightforward and just honest with my feelings about it. So let's get into it, ladies and gentlemen. We'll talk about the national decks again, and I know I'm kind of tired of talking about this point, and I think it's in a weird position, right? But I think the reason for today's video is more about the future of Pokemon rather than, like, you know, the national decks for Sword and Shield. So this is less to do with specifically Sword and Shield, but also does have to do with Sword and Shield. So it's a little bit of a weird situation, but hear me out though, ladies and gentlemen. In today's video, I want to talk about the potential of the national decks being in a third version of Pokemon Sword and Shield. And what I mean by that is, like, if you look back at Pokemon games, let's hypothetically speak about, like, Pokemon Emerald, right? Or Pokemon, you know, Platinum or Crystal, you know, one of those games, right? That, like, the third edition to the you know, the kind of generation you get. Those games tend to just really be, like, nothing really that's, I mean, if you're gonna be honest about it, right, they aren't really that special. All they really do is add minuscule changes and, like, add some extra elements to them, and that's about it, though. In reality, those things should be in the original games, and they shouldn't have to be in the third version. That's kind of like the definitive, you know, version of the games, because that kind of makes the original versions obsolete, unless there's something in the original versions that makes them slightly more unique. Of course, you know, we loved Emerald and Platinum and those games for their own, you know, specific kind of features that were added to them that made them greater, right? But if we look at, you know, recent times as what's been happening with those kind of third editions and that sort of stuff, with the only games we really had that with so far has been Ultra Sun and Moon in recent time, and those to a lot of people weren't that great because it felt like it was something that should have been in, like, you know, already in Sun and Moon, and that's what it's starting to feel like they're gonna go with. And now the thing I want to suggest today is that there is a possibility, a major possibility, that what Gamefreak is going to plan out to do is to add the remaining Pokedex in a third version, making it, for the people who play Pokemon, a necessity to buy that third version, making them more money. Now, please, do not attack Masuda, do not attack Omori. They aren't the ones who just pocket those big chunks of money. The ones who pocket that money are the CEOs, the shit up there, you know, the investors, the people up there who make the big dollar Skrilla, right? They are the ones who make all the money. And I think Game Freak is in a weird position right now where they are no longer the main money maker for the Pokemon company. Now Pokemon Go exists as well, and they've kind of realized that they can just cut corners to make it through and just release a game that can make the equal amount of money that they've always made. If anything, actually more money now, because now the games are sold for a higher pricing, and that sort of stuff. And also there's just, generally speaking, you know, just kind of a higher, like, just sales value nowadays, like, just generally when you sell that shit, versus before. Because most of the stuff goes through the eShop, and that means that they earn 100% of the money instead of having to, like, you know, pay to, like, a distributor and that sort of stuff. You know, it's like, this way, they make far more money due to digital sales and all that stuff. So what I think is going to end up happening here, in the situation we're currently in, is that we might get ourselves the remaining Pokedex in a third edition, and this would make so much sense because they've always really loved doing the third editions because they're minuscule amount of work, but you make a ton of money. Like, if we look at the actual numbers for when they sell these, like, third editions, they make tons from them, right? Like, sure, they don't sell as well as, like, what you get from, like, a brand new game or, like, a remake or something, but they still sell a lot of copies, if we're going to be frankly honest. I think if you actually search up Pokemon video game sales, I think you'll notice that they actually sell almost around the same, like, number. So if we look right here, we've got Pokemon Yellow, which sold 14 million, versus the 31 million sales of Red, Green, and Blue combined, which means the Japanese, you know, English, European versions of those. And those were, of course, the old games, so those are kind of hard to look at. But then if you look at Generation 2, of course, Gold and Silver sold 23 million, and then Crystal, which was just a minusculely improved version, it really didn't have much else to it. Like, sure, there was small changes, but it sold another 39 million copies. That's still a lot of sales, okay? That's like a lot of sales for just literally the same game as the other two, just with minuscule amounts of improvements. Like, that's still a lot of sales, and that's something that should be kept in mind. Also, changing camera for a minute. Ooh. But that's something that definitely should be kept in mind, though, that, you know, they definitely make a lot of money from doing these third versions with the most insignificant amount of effort put into it, right? And, like, that's what where I'm worried about, that people will just blatantly accept that they will do this now with, let's say, Pokemon Bow. Also, shout out to the person who made the bow art here from Reddit. I'll leave a link down below. But there is a very high risk, okay, that all they're gonna do is give us a third version that just kind of runs. It's kind of the run-of-the-mill third version game just to make that quick money and force us, you know, to just go and buy this Pokemon Bow game, right? There's a possibility for that. Now, of course, the time frame for that we're gonna get into a little bit later. Now, What's the biggest problem with this? Like, you might be like, okay, cool, well, then I'll just wait for that game to come out. Well, there's a possibility that it won't. You know what I mean? Then it's kind of like, okay, well, I didn't buy Sword and Shield when it was hype. What am I doing now? You know, there's not many people playing it anymore. Maybe the next game will have come out or whatever. You know, but here's the thing. I think the situation is like this. I think Pokemon Bow is a higher possibility now. I didn't think it was that in the past. When Sword and Shield were first announced, I didn't think that was a possibility. But now, due to the fact that the Pokedex is missing, I'm highly more inclined to believe that what Gamefreak is maybe trying to do here is to just make that third version with all the remaining Pokemon that we wanted, right? Plus all the Pokemon that we had in Sword and Shield, making it a complete game, but making Sword and Shield obsolete. That would make the competitive scene in Sword and Shield totally useless, right? And everybody would be so happy and totally forget about all the issues that were created by Sword and Shield. You know what I mean? And that would make them obsolete and just make the newest game, which would be Pokemon Bow or Pokemon Gun, whatever you want to call it, the one and only game that should be, you know, in front of your face. And that's a little bit problematic. I feel like that isn't the way they should go about these things. I feel like when they're making the Pokemon games, they need to just make one singular, proper product and not have to split it up into sections just to sell it to us several times over. This is why when people ask me in the past, like before we knew about the National Dex, people kept asking me or telling me like, dude, we're gonna get Kalos as post game. It's guaranteed. Kalos is, Kalos is France and, Galar is UK. It makes sense that we're gonna have definitely like Kalos post game. And I kept saying no. Why? Because it makes no sense for Gamefreak. It makes no sense for Gamefreak as a company. It just makes no sense for them to go down the path of making less money. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, if they give us Kalos as a post-game, that's just extra effort from them to make another region for us playable when they know they can just sell us a singular region with Galar, and that's enough for us to be happy, right? Like, giving us that one region is enough. They know that's enough to make us happy. They know that. Why haven't we had dual regions since Johto? Well, let me explain. The reason Johto, the Johto games, the Gen 2 games, had two regions, is because those games were considered to be the last Pokemon games they were ever gonna make. Why? Because they didn't think Pokemon had the staying power to stick around for the amount of time that, it ended up doing. They didn't think Pokemon was gonna be alive for this amount of length. That's why they added Kanto in there, because they thought, hey, people maybe don't want to buy the game if it doesn't feature the first game, because it's a different region and stuff, so let's include both the regions. This might be our last game. We might as well go all out, you know what I mean? So let's do it. And that's what they did, right? And then it turns out Pokemon is still popular. They're still sold like 23 million copies. That's ludicrous, okay? That's a lot of numbers. It's the highest numbers since, Red and Blue, and we haven't had that high numbers in ages. But they managed to sell high numbers, and they kept going, right? And Pokemon's now been in a consistent kind of growth spurt, and it's just not dropping off. And that brings me back to, the whole, Pokemon Bow situation, and, what kind of issue it creates, right? It creates this issue where people will forget about the issues that existed with Sword and Shield, and totally disregard them, and this also makes Sword and Shield totally obsolete, and there's no point in owning them anymore, because they will be so different from what the kind of finalized perfect version is of the games. Now, there's a high possibility, and this is another thing I want to get into, which is a time frame, right? There's a high possibility they won't do this, and I always used to think that they wouldn't do this for one reason, and that's because they have so many other things they can do now that would probably just, work out equally as well, or that they know would probably maybe even sell better. What am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about Diamond and Pearl remakes and Let's Go Johto. Now, Let's Go Johto is something I personally do not want. I just want to put that out there so you understand. I do not want to see Let's Go Johto. I know some of you all are just like, I want to see it. Well, personally, I don't want, because I think Heart Gold Soul Silver is the perfect Johto. It's the perfect Johto Gen 2 games, and I don't want to see any other ones, because I know they won't make them as good. They just won't achieve that level of amazingness that was Heart Gold Soul Silver. That's why I do not want to see another Johto game. But I know they will do it because they want to make that money, and they know they can play off of our nostalgia. So that's why they will do that. Diamond and Pearl, guaranteed to be happening next year. They probably just will look kind of like what Sun and Moon look like, but just be like a, just Diamond and Pearl. You're just going to play through Sinnoh again in 3D, which probably will be a lot of fun, but that's about it, right? And do remember that what they did with Oras was to remove features we liked, removed aspects we did like, like the Battle Frontier and stuff, and then just kind of left us there hanging, what's the deal here? Why would you remove these things that were in the games initially? And Gamefreak will always give these excuses, right? The Pokemon Company will always give these excuses as well, like, oh, this doesn't fit with this game, or oh, this feature was specific to this game, right? And all that bullshit. They always give these excuses, right? Those are literally just excuses. They just make up excuses because they don't have legitimate reasons for it. And people just kind of roll with it. And the thing right now is, the current situation is like this. There is a high possibility we might get a third version of Pokemon Sword and Shield. And that third version will totally destroy any reason to own Sword and Shield, because it most likely will include the rest of the Pokedex. There's a high possibility for that. And if that's what they're doing, I am genuinely disappointed if that's the path we're going down. If the path we're going down is one where they're gonna literally make it like totally obsolete to have bought the Sword and Shield games just to have Pokemon Go, I would be genuinely pissed off, because that just isn't right. That isn't right. You shouldn't have been doing that. That just doesn't feel correct in my eyes, and that just makes anybody who bought Sword and Shield feel kind of dumb, because you bought that, and now the completed version of what you wanted is here. It now exists, right? And that's how it feels to a lot of people, with like buying Sun and Moon and then getting Ultra Sun and Moon, which changes stuff. It's like, well, why weren't these changes in the original game to make it better, or like why weren't these features in the original game, or just not like even those games, but like tons of other ones. And then games that should have a follow up, right, or like a secondary game, like X and Y, that needed a Pokemon Z to kind of complete the story, doesn't get it, right? It's so strange with Gamefreak, because they really just go their own little, they have their minds in their own little place. But I do want to make sure to point something out, guys. Please do not please stop harassing Masuda and Omori on Twitter, specifically Masuda, because seriously, spamming hashtag bring back national decks under every single thing he posts or every single thing he responds to isn't gonna make shit better. Now, is Masuda, to blame here? Probably a little bit, I would say so, because he is like the face of this whole thing, the face of Pokemon, and he has a big, he makes a lot of choices when it comes to these games. He's usually the producer or the designer or whatever. He usually has a lot of director, he usually has a lot of input in these things, right? So he definitely has an input, but I don't think you should be harassing him and attacking him on every corner just because, because you're not getting the national decks. At that point, if you're harassing, attacking him, or sending him threats, you don't even deserve to be. Just don't harass him. That's all I'm asking, okay? Like, please, just don't blame him, okay? Just blame, like, the Pokemon Company and Game Freak as a whole, right? Like, them together, because you can't just make, like, say that the Pokemon Company is the reasoning to blame here. It's also to blame Game Freak for the choices they are making and for wanting to just cut corners rather than put their, full-on hearts into it and make sure to give us a perfect product, because they've been cutting corners for years now, and it's undeniable. You can't sit there and try to act like they haven't been cutting corners. They really have, and it's honestly a little bit annoying. It gets a little bit tiresome, because there are studios out there that can probably make a better Pokemon game. There definitely are. But I'm also going to be honest. I do not want another studio to take over Pokemon for one reason, and that's because I feel like if the Pokemon Company was to take Game Freak away from this position, which they can't do, because Game Freak owns like 33% of the Pokemon brand and the Pokemon, kind of company, right? They own like 33% of that, and then like Creatures Inc. owns a percentage, and then also Nintendo owns a percentage. That's why those three companies always have to sign under shit whenever they're like trademarking stuff, because all three of them own the stuff. Here's the thing. They won't lose it, but if they were to lose it, I fear that we would get an even worse Pokemon game. Why? Because, think about this. Game Freak has yet to do something very drastic, like, for example, making Pokeballs cost real money, or like skipping gyms for money. You might think like, oh, that's ludicrous, they would never do that. Well, here's the thing. I never thought they would do that for other franchises that I loved. I never thought they would do that for franchises that I genuinely adored, but they've done it in those games. So what would stop these guys from doing it as well? You've seen it with Konami and stuff. Like, they're selling in like Metal Gear Survive. They're selling save files for like $10. Save files for $10. Okay? They could be so much worse. I am happy Game Freak are the ones controlling Pokemon at the moment, because I feel like if Pokemon Company was to give it to anyone, there is a high potential that company could go just be like, okay, the Pokemon Company wants us to make profit. We can make a quick game. Maybe add some microtransactions, make some extra profit, some extra Skrilla, will be good. But ladies and gentlemen, my honest opinion is that there is a high chance, there is a possibility that we might get ourselves Pokemon Bow, and that game will have a completed version of Sword and Shield. Maybe an improved graphics, maybe, all the Pokemon in it. And if they do that, I will be quite disappointed, because it makes the existence of Pokemon Sword and Shield totally obsolete. It makes it that you just didn't have any purpose to own them. There was just like no reasoning for you to own those games at all. And that would be quite sad, because honestly, that just means that they didn't care enough to just make the full product. But that's only a possibility, though. That doesn't mean it's guaranteed. But I want to know, your opinion. Do you think that there is a possibility that they could have gone down this path where they only, like, or they will go down this path? Because I think the more likely path than Pokemon Bow is actually for us to get Diamond and Pearl remakes in 2020, and then Let's Go Johto in 2021. because clearly they're trying to put out new games every year. But maybe the amount of backlash they've gotten right now might change their minds about pushing out a new game every year. And maybe 2020 might have no Pokemon game. But maybe they didn't care enough. Maybe they just know that if the sales are good of Sword and Shield, they'll continue on this spree of putting out games. And by next year, when you get Diamond and Pearl remakes, you will even forget about Sword and Shield being like what they were. If then they end up being horrible, you'll forget about it. All of you will. Majority of people will just forget about it. They'll just move on, because that's just what it is. Game Freak just is banking on that. They're banking on you guys not caring enough and just moving on. And that's just how it is. That's just how things are. This is like the same thing with Call of Duty. Call of Duty keeps making dumbass mistakes, dumbass choices with their games and stuff, making horrible choices, and people keep buying because people don't care. And that's just how it is. So, I don't know, man. I'm a little disappointed, like, where Pokemon's going and where Pokemon's been heading for the last half a decade. Ever since, like, X and Y, Pokemon's just kind of been cutting corners and just doesn't feel like it's the Pokemon games that we grew up with when we were younger. I mean, at least me. But I do hope that, Sword and Shield end up being great games. I think they still have a potential of being amazing games. As long as there's a good post-game, I'm happy, honestly. Like, as long as the post-game is great, I'm satisfied. But honestly, who knows? Either way, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. My name is RuffledRowlit. I hope this was a great day, and bye-bye, ladies and gentlemen.